the goal.
Mm-hmm.
I was just speaking to candidates earlier today, and yeah, like looks like a lot of the fresh graduates, their universities are doing online webinars for them and sending them, to courses and stuff like that. Because there's just so much time, and there's not enough jobs at the moment.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one of the key things. So yeah, why not just spend time more productively, learn something new. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Ooh. Hello,
Cool.
Tabitha.
So we are live.
Yay.
Cool. And have you done any live webinars before, Sarah?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay.
So this is going to be very exciting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an exciting conversation. And I remember the first time I did it, it was very, very nervous doing live webinar, but then now it's almost like second nature. I'm like just doing this thing every week now.
I'm going live. No biggie.
Yeah, I think once you get used to it, it's kind of fine. So yeah, it's we're live on Facebook. So for those of us who are joining on Facebook, welcome. And for those of us who have logged in to the Zoom, thank you for joining us and thank you for being on time. Hi, Tabitha. Haven't seen you in a while. So we're going to start in maybe a couple of minutes, but I think what is probably worth mentioning is that this has been going on weekly for a period of time. So really appreciate that some of you are still joining us after so many weeks in session. So let me start by giving Sarah a fair introduction. So Sarah actually has a master's degree in human-computer interaction, and she has actually done work in the last 4 years for startups, global MNCs, and government agencies. So welcome to all those who just joined us in the Zoom call. Thank you for being on time. And Sarah was most recently the UX researcher at Accenture Interactive team, where she deep dive into the sort of like design research, especially very complex design research for government websites. And I think Sarah mentioned she's a gamer. She also mentioned, like, as you can see from her gaming chair. What do you want to share the brand of the gaming chair?
It's not one that I recommend, so
it's not one that you recommend. Okay, let's not talk about it then.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so I think what's interesting is that Sarah has been through and through studying human-computer interaction for a number of years, and I wanted her to share this evening a little bit more about research and design research. Korean, you're looking good, man. You're looking very good. Thanks for turning on your video. And yeah, and for the rest who joined, thank you for joining. Kaisin, Lin, and Mel, Saikat, Shimin, Tabitha, and Fidaus. Hi, welcome. All right, so let's start, Sarah. Like now, you've been doing design research for a while, right? Like, can you tell me, like, on a day-to-day basis, what you did at Accenture Interactive? Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest things is that I didn't have a day that looked the same. Every single day was different, and each new day brought different things. But if I were to kind of like summarize what I was doing there, it would be something under the category of either planning, conducting, or advocating for research in some way.
Okay. Yeah. Understood. So while there's never a dull day in being a UX designer or UX researcher, what were some of the...
I'm a researcher.
Yeah, I know. And so I say, like, being whether you're a designer or a researcher, like there's never a dull day, I think. Yeah. So when you were doing research and your focus is on research, what are some of the more challenging parts of the role?
I think something that surprised me when I kind of came into my first full-time role was how much the role wasn't just about like supporting designers or doing the research, but also about stakeholder management. I think this, this was particularly the case in a place like Accenture, where you're working with a big like end-to-end consultancy with lots of different stakeholders, both internally and externally. So that was a kind of like a big surprise and also like a challenge for me.
So lots of stakeholder management, lots of talking to business stakeholders. Do you have to also like train them? Do you have to like teach them UX at some level as well?
Pretty much. Like not in a very kind of like formal sense where I got to like sit down with them for half a day and do like trainings, but really kind of like on the go. Like I think there were a couple of instances where I was put into a project and then the client was like, so who are you and why are you here? And I'm like, okay, well. Yeah, and then basically having to kind of like quickly introduce myself, and then as time went by, kind of like really started making it a point to showcase like, this is what I'm doing, like you're welcome to be part of it. This is how this is supporting the designers, and this is how this is supporting your business outcome. So yeah, that was something that I really quickly picked up on.
Lovely. And what were some of, say, like you know, some of the more memorable moments working at Accenture Interactive? Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of my work is under NDA, but I'll talk about what I can. Let's see, I found working with, when it came to kind of like government projects, I think there was a lot, I mean, this is going to sound super cliche, but just in terms of like knowing that the work that you're doing is going to make an impact on the wider population in Singapore, and knowing that, you know, this design will actually help people like get the services they need and like help them get it faster. And like basically reduce some of the red tape, like knowing that you play a part in that is something that really kind of like kept driving me to want to be involved in a lot of government projects, even though those are often the most stakeholder heavy. But yeah, I think like, I mean, I also did a few projects with Google, and that was really, really fun. I got to like go to the office and like see what the office is like and see all like the random stuff they have in the offices. They have like Lego walls, free food everywhere, like gaming rooms, that kind of thing. And you're just like, whoa.
Yeah,
And
the Google office in Singapore is pretty amazing. But I saw the Google office in London as well, and that oh wait, it was Dublin, so it was it's like way bigger as well, and it's pretty crazy. Major
it's
unicorn
amazing.
tech companies. So how come you came to work for the Google project? Like I thought internally like Google would have like their own designers. So how did you come to be involved in Think with Google, right? That was the project that you were involved in.
Yeah, so the work that I was doing with Google was UX related, but not direct, but I wasn't directly involved in a Google product. So so the project that I did with Think with Google, that one basically involved doing, I think like we did over 700 expert reviews of mobile websites across 12 different countries. And basically like my role as UX researcher there was basically to plan the actual assessment, what goes into the assessment, how to balance the scoring across different countries and things like that. And then after that, we produced reports that went on to Think with Google that basically showcase like in this region, what do the websites do well? In this region, what do the websites do well? Yeah. So it was a very kind of like different take on what UX research could look like. But yes, but they do have very strong internal teams that do design research for like Google products. And those teams are very, very strong on their own.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And you got to had a chance to sort of interact with them as well.
Yeah. I mean, I got to chat with them and then say hi and be like, what are you guys doing? This is really cool. Yeah, it was fun.
Cool. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that's under NDA, but I think that was a great experience. So what I hear you say is that the research that you did for Think with Google, was that being used for the publication itself? Was it like almost like a market research piece?
Almost like a market research piece, I guess. I mean, like, I was doing expert reviews of the UX like on mobile sites.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. Okay.
but I guess the way the results were being used were more kind of like, were slightly more marketing based, I guess.
Okay.
Mm,
I've always been very curious about this question, right? And I
mm,
think I'm not a design researcher. Like I'm not full on specialized, and I'm more in product and product management and strategy. So I'm
mm.
curious to know, like, how do you pick a appropriate research method, well, when you're conducting research?
So I mean, there's a lot of factors.
Mm,
I do tend to focus more on the product side of things as well. The one with
mm,
Google was quite exceptional.
mm,
For the Google one, the method was kind of sort of already decided. It was more a case of like balancing kind of like what goes into the assessment and like how we balance that across the different countries. But for something that's more kind of like product related,
mm,
I think about things like the time that I have available to do
mm,
research,
mm,
what resources I have, like the
mm,
overall maturity of the team.
mm,
So yeah, and then I use that to basically kind of like gauge, okay, like how much of this particular method can I do? So I mean, they want to test something that's already out there and compare it with
mm,
what's the competition. That's obviously user testing. They have a group of people that they want to market to, but they don't really, or they want to like create products for, but they don't really know much about them, and the secondhand information out there isn't great. So
mm,
that's probably more likely to be kind of like more qualitative, maybe interviews or surveys or contextual inquiry, observation. It all depends on the factors that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
interesting you pointed this fact out. You said
Mm.
one of the factors for you to decide on a research method is the maturity of the team. So how does that come into play? What do you mean by the maturity of the team?
So usually the maturity tells me how much to involve them and
Mm,
to what degree I can do certain things, particularly when it comes to like introducing qualitative research.
mm,
I am generalizing quite massively here.
mm,
But like generally speaking, like less mature organizations are a lot less comfortable with qualitative research.
mm,
So yeah, so it's just like, okay, maybe we can do user testing, but at the beginning we maybe ask a few kind of like contextual questions. So we're combining an interview and a user test in one.
mm.
And so like I get to do the user test and give them the results that they're looking for, but also introduce a little bit of what, like this qualitative data could also do for you and the
I
design
see.
and for the outcomes they're looking for.
Right.
So yeah.
So it's a way to kind of like persuade the stakeholder, hey, look, we're getting actual data over here, and we're
Mhm.
testing certain things, and
Yeah.
that's a very clear set objective. But
Mhm.
then at the same time, you're also asking contextual questions with regards to the product, and based on that, you can then advise them, hey, this is also what the different customers are saying, and then you provide your analysis and your recommendations from there.
Yeah.
Did I summarize it
Yeah, I
correctly?
think you summarized it pretty well.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Sarah. So
Mm.
yeah, I think that's a very very fair approach. In terms of considering the maturity of the team, that's something that's quite new. Time is definitely a factor, and resources is definitely another key factor as well in designing the research method. What are the common research methods that every UX designer needs to know, like that you
Uh,
think should,
User
uh,
testing and interviews easily.
user testing and interviews will be the
Yeah.
key. Okay.
Those are the like absolute key basics that you have to know, because you have to like understand what people are looking for
Mm,
when they're using your design and what happens when people actually use your design. So
yeah.
yeah, those are the
How
absolute essential.
how do you tell an amateur user tester and interviewer versus a professional user tester and interviewer?
The most common one is jumping in.
Mm,
So someone who is quite new to user research, especially if the designer is the one conducting the user test,
mm,
or the developer or someone who's very, very close to the design itself. Oftentimes, like someone who's brand new to user testing will see a user doing something wrong feel very uncomfortable about it and will either just jump in and try to like fix it and be like, no, you're supposed to go here, or like they will show in some like nonverbal way that the
Yeah.
person is doing it wrong, and then the person who's doing the test, if they're paying any attention to you, they will realize and be like, oh no, okay,
Oh
I'm
dear.
supposed to be
Okay.
doing something else, and then you've completely lost that kind of like natural reaction that you're looking for in a user.
I think that's so great. I want to point out and fish that point that you just made, right? Like keeping that neutral face. It almost seems like you have to have a poker face when you're doing user tests. Is that true?
Yes. Well, I mean, like, because you're balancing being this kind of like neutral party, but you're also balancing kind of like building a rapport and building a connection with the person that you're testing with as well, especially if you test in like a lab or in a non-natural situation. Yeah, so there's kind of like that balance that you have to do.
Okay. That's interesting. So we have a question from Kaisin over at the audience. She asked, how can one conduct a non-biased user interview?
A non-biased user interview?
Yeah.
Interesting. I would be kind of like, curious to hear what she kind of like thinks. Yeah, is.
I think you want to like unmute your mic and share a little bit. I don't know if it's convenient for you. Not now.
Not now,
Okay.
sorry.
I'll come back to your question later,
Sure.
Kaisi. All right. So we talked about user tests, separating amateurs from professionals, and that one of the key factors being, how neutral are they when they are doing and conducting the tests. For user interviews, like how do you tell like from an amateur versus a professional who's doing a user interview?
So I think someone who isn't very experienced, if they're hearing the answers they like, they will often say things like, oh yeah, that's great, or like, yeah, like, and just give like a very kind of like very positive responses, or like have very clear differences between when they hear a response they don't like versus a response that they do like. Yeah, so that's usually one of the most obvious things. I think I actually do have like, I mean, obviously I would like to hear a bit more from Kai-Sing, but in terms of like an unbiased interview, I think something that really helps is to have the person conducting the interview not be someone who is directly involved in the design if you have that option. Because this person is not actually like, does not actually have a stake in how the person responds to the interview.
I see. So
Yeah,
if whenever possible,
like someone who's still on the team, but maybe not directly doing the design itself. So a researcher, or sometimes in like Accenture, it was a business analyst. And that can sometimes help in terms of reducing bias.
Okay. I think that's a really fair distinction, especially when you have a stake in the design. Sometimes you get a little bit too angsty and personal, and maybe you start
They're
to
just
show
excited about your work.
exactly.
Like, yeah.
So that actually might pollute the data from the interview itself, especially from the qualitative side. I want to ask you, I mean, from your perspective, is it generally recommended to do both qualitative and quantitative data and just kind of like cross compare in general? Is that like, would you say that's a rule of thumb kind of like approach?
I mean, it really depends on on what your organization values and what you have access to, because even quantitative tools cost money, right? So, but if you can have a two-pronged approach, then that is absolutely great. I think the easiest way to distinguish like the purposes of quantitative versus qualitative data, like this is quite general, this is quite broad strokes, but I think it communicates the idea decently well. Like quantitative tells you what is happening, qualitative data tells you why it's happening. So that's why ideally you have the two of those things in order to be able to get a complete picture of what is going on with your product. Yeah, that's the ideal. But you just have to work with what your organization or your client has and then like run with it and do the best you can.
Yeah, I think that's a very succinct distinction that you mentioned, right? What is happening is based on the quantitative data that you collect, and why is it happening is the qualitative data. So that's really wonderful. Something I'm also hearing for the first time. So Korean from the audience asks, how do you deal with respondents who are flat and unenthusiastic and give monosyllabic answers? Is it better to just finish it off quickly and move on to another? Yeah.
So there's two parts to how I approach participants like that. The first one is the beginning. At the beginning, when you're actually introducing the test itself, and you're going to be like, oh, I'm going to be like asking you like what's going through your mind a lot. I'm going to be asking you like things as we're going through this. So yeah, basically, I'm just going to be asking you a lot of questions, and so that they know that they're going to be asked about like they're going to be asked a lot about what's going through their mind. And the second part is like giving them a moment to like think through something, even if they're completely flat and unresponsive. Most of the time they are thinking at least a little bit about what's in front of them, especially if they seem like stuck on something. After a little while, I'll be like, hey, so I'm just wondering like what's going through your mind, or I'll latch onto a specific behavior and seeing. So let's say, for example, they're like moving their mouse around a lot, but not clicking on something, which usually indicates that they're searching for something. So I'll be like, hey, I noticed you're looking around like a lot on the page. Could you kind of like let me know what's going through your mind here? I think like at the beginning, one way that I like to set up participants is to basically like, if you can, I know this is not necessarily the most natural thing, but it would be great if you could put your brain on loudspeaker.
Your brain,
That's
you could
usually,
put your brain on loudspeaker. Oh, right.
so give me like a
You
running
literally tell
commentary
them
of
that.
what's going. Yeah, I literally tell them that.
Please put your brain on loudspeaker. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much. If I have time, I'll run them through like a really quick like practice as well. Like I'll have them search something on Google and then like narrate through their mind, because it's obviously not a very natural. It's not a natural thing to ask people to like speak like
Right.
about what they're doing. So you give them a little practice, you set them up, and then you just like kind of like gently encourage. Obviously, without leading them into a specific
Yeah.
action.
Okay, you might just
yeah.
kind of doing a step by step for us, right? Let's say I'm the person that is supposed to do your test. Like, how would you
Sure.
walk me through like the test before the test? So you're yeah, maybe you can just
Oh,
brief me in.
So, okay. So like invite them in, thank them for their time. So, thanks very much for coming in today. So, I'm just going to explain a little bit about what we're going to do today. So, I'm going to be putting you in front of a prototype for a website that our business is working on. It's a prototype, which means that some parts may not work very well. If there's something that's really like, just work with what you can. If there's something really like not working, then I might step in. One thing I want to emphasize today is that we're here to collect your honest feedback. So don't worry about kind of like upsetting anybody. If you're not part of the design team, then like I'm not actually like the person that put this together. So you don't have to worry about upsetting anybody. And like, yeah, we're really here to hear your thoughts. So there's something what I'll do is I'll give you some tasks, you'll go through them, and actually while you're doing that, it would be great if you could kind of like put your brain on loudspeaker. Like what I mean by that is that if you could just kind of like let me know what's going through your mind as you're going through these like tasks. I might ask you some questions along the way, and yeah, then let's get started.
Lovely. So
Yeah.
what would be the first test? You'll get me to go to Google's search engine
If I have time, because you don't
right.
always have time, right?
Okay.
If I have time, like an example practice task that I like to do is basically like have them go into Google and find the Wikipedia page for Apple, as in the fruit, not the laptop. And and then basically like have them do that as like a first task as a practice. So they'll be like clicking, they'll often be a little bit kind of like awkward.
Right.
And then and then I'll ask like, so what's going through your mind here? And then it was like, oh, like I like the look of the Google logo today, or like I can see there's Apple the company and then Apple the fruit. I guess you want Apple the fruit, so I'll click on that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a warm up before the test itself, and especially if you have time. All right.
Yeah, you don't always have time, but if I don't have time, then what I'll do is I'll make the first task a relatively simple one, often one that is actually not very consequential to the design, but is part of the design. That's another way to do the practice.
That's a really good way to integrate everything together. Like just kind of ease them into it, like a gradient kind of approach. That's wonderful.
Yeah, you do the same for interviews too, like in terms of like getting people like
Start with the easy questions, right? Like
yeah.
then after that
Start
goes.
broad and then like go
Yeah,
deeper.
that's what I always tell my students. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. So everyone, if you're getting value from this, like please type in chat and let us know, and feel free to also share this specific value video on your Facebook, because I think there's a lot of value bombs being dropped over here by Sarah. So yeah, I see thumbs up and claps. Thank you so much. Very insightful, Kai
Thank
Sensei.
you.
Yeah. Wonderful. So for those of you who just joined, we have Sarah here today, ex-Accenture design researcher. So really going deep dive today on design research. I'm learning as well as I'm interviewing her, all these little nuances that I'm not aware about. So Kurian asked the next question: is it advisable to include a lot of qualitative questions in a survey? Considering it's not easy to follow. Corinne, you want to give some
Ooh.
context? What do you mean by qualitative questions? Do you mean open-ended questions? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
Corinne.
So like generally in surveys, I generally ask questions where I can provide some pre-worded answers where they can click through or an other. But sometimes I really want to ask why did they choose this answer, and like what is the drive behind this and all that. Is it better to ask that in a survey, or is it better to just ask them for their contact and then call them up and have a proper interview?
So if I'm understanding correctly, what you're asking is along the lines of like, if I want to understand the why behind a particular choice, like, should I just add it into the survey, or shall I just like follow up and give people a call basically, or ask for their details to follow up?
Yeah.
Honestly, there's no reason why you can't do both. I mean, obviously, when you're doing a survey, one of the things that you have to balance is the attention span and the cognitive load that you're putting on on someone who's responding to the survey. So obviously, if you overload too many open-ended questions, they may be less inclined to complete the survey seriously. So that is something that you do have to think about. So I wouldn't do it like after every single question in turning like a 20-question survey into a 50-question survey. Like, yeah, I would generally but there's no reason why you can't do a little bit of both, like have a multiple choice question, and then could you briefly like say why you picked that particular choice? I mean, obviously I don't know the really like super tiny details of what you're what you're asking about. But yeah, if you are going to be contacting them after, I would put it like up front in the survey to say that we might contact you afterwards, so people have that expectation and they don't think that you're a marketer or a telemarketer. Sorry. Yeah. So just a no.
Did that answer your question, Korean?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks for asking. Two great questions. So I would like to find out, like, because I understand, Sarah, now it's COVID and you have decided to go independent, right? So now you're an independent design researcher. You work on freelance projects and you kind of work for yourself. How's that going for you right now? Like, I understand you're working for one of your friends' company, and of course you're taking on other projects.
It's a friend of a friend's company, if that makes sense. Yeah. In terms of how freelancing is going, it's going pretty well. I suddenly have a huge amount of like freedom in terms of my time. I guess to I kind of clarify how I differentiate freelancing versus contracting, because it differs for everybody. Freelancing is just kind of like you take on projects that may not have like full hours, whereas with contracting, you take on like a 9 to 5 for X number of weeks or months. And with freelancing, I can take on like part-time projects that don't take up my full day, and I have a huge amount of flexibility in what I do during the day.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And has that sort of like opened any doors for you now that you're a freelancer?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Has it opened any doors for me?
Yeah, because I mean, in the past, like you're working full time, right? So you're tied to the specific project, and your hours are tied to the company. So now that you control your own hours, now that you do your own thing, how has that changed in terms of working? Yeah.
I mean, other than like a lot of freedom in how I use my time, I'm spending a lot of time doing kind of like other things. Like I'm watching a lot of like the big design conferences that you usually have to pay like thousands of dollars to go to like the US for and stuff.
Now they're making
now all online, and a lot of them will record their talks. So yeah.
You have any to recommend? You sound like someone who has actually watched a lot of these. So maybe what are some of your recommendations? Like which design conference should we check out recording?
So okay, I'm trying to think of like ones that are coming up right now. There's one happening tomorrow that is for UX researchers. It's called UXRConf. I have a feeling though that most of the people in this call are probably more like designers. So let's see.
Is it a free event or is it a paid one?
No, but what a lot of places are doing now is that they are offering discounted tickets for people who like are from overseas. Like UXRConf initially was like 600 USD, which is completely nuts, right?
Yeah.
Ain't nobody got that kind of money. I don't.
What's it called? It's called UXRCon, is it? You said?
Yeah, UXRCon. It's literally just called UXR conference.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and now they are selling cheaper tickets for 99 USD. And that still gives you access to like, I mean, you need to stay up late because it's US time, but that still gives you access to all the same kind of like networking events, all the partner events that that everyone else in the States also has. The only downside is that you have to stay up. But yeah.
But the lineup looks really great. I mean, like there are people from like Booking.com, Bitly, Zapier, all the top Silicon Valley companies, and you said what, $99 US? Okay, but we're not going to sell their conference tickets here. But then it comes highly recommended from Sara, who's independent.
It's a very research focused one. I think some other kind of like interesting events that have been coming up. Unfortunately I don't know any that are coming up like right now. I just know ones that have gone like past.
Yeah, what about the ones in the past? Like, is there any particular recording that people should check out?
Recordings. So a lot of the recordings are not free. You have to have bought a ticket in order to access the recordings. But there's a really good database by a group that's called Mind the Product.
Mind the Product.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. Yep. So Mind the Product actually have a really good blog and newsletter, and they do a lot of like product-based talks. So it's a mix of like PM, design, and research. And they're a really good kind of like overall general source. Full disclosure, by the way, I've been volunteering for them for years, but I am recommending them because I genuinely like the organization. So yeah. So
I do check them out a lot as well when I'm product management and product owner role. You can't miss them. They're good at what they do.
Yeah, they're excellent, and a lot of their talks are free on Vimeo.
What about books? Like, do you have any particular books that you would recommend? Like, so most of the people here are UX designers. So would you have a book that you would recommend specifically on UX research? Yeah.
So there's a really interesting book that's published by Rosenfeld Media. I think it's called Lean Product Research. If you give me, you might actually have it in front of me. Actually, no, sorry. Okay, I actually have it. It's. If you're wondering, I have a huge stack of books behind this laptop
I'm sure.
because I use and reference books a lot in my work. But anyway,
what's it called?
It's called Validating Product Ideas.
Okay, cool.
So this is a really like good intro to lean research, and it's and the way that they the way they explain it, the way it's structured is in very plain language, which is great for like PMs or designers that kind of like want to do something on their own and they don't have the luxury of a researcher. Another, my kind of like favorite book of all time to kind of like introduce people to user research is Just Enough Research by Erica Hall.
Yeah, Just Enough Research. Yeah, Erica did a wonderful
that is
talk.
published. Yeah.
I think she did a wonderful talk for WordPress, and actually the YouTube video is available online. So and obviously she talks a lot about the distinctions in her writings as well. Yeah, so that's definitely a wonderful one. Cool. that's great. Those are some really awesome resources for those who are just getting started in user research. How has your role sort of like evolved now? Like, I mean, you've been doing research for a while, right? So what is your career trajectory? Where do you think this is like going? Yeah.
So I'm actually like, as long as it involves research in some way, I'm actually fairly open. Like I'm generally speaking, I think this is the same for designers as well. You can either generally go down the like individual contributor or a specialist path where you're really like delivering on the day-to-day, or you go down the managerial path where you basically like become a senior, become a manager, and then you're dealing with more like that business level part of your work, whether that is research or design. For me, I'm quite like comfortable to see what comes as well. Like partly because I'm generally quite chill, and the other part is also because like in somewhere like Singapore, where maybe there isn't as much design maturity as like other parts of the world, there may actually not be that very kind of like structured path for a designer or a researcher. Not necessarily. Some organizations do have it, but not all. So there's value and flexibility there.
Lovely. Thanks for sharing. And I think that's definitely valid. That it almost seems like how do I put it? Like there's always this saying, right? Like you get so good at doing something, and then they'll just promote you and to be a manager eventually, and then after that you get good at managing people, and then you kind of like forget a lot about your skills and stuff. Yeah, like I think that's sort of like the one of the potential career path. But I see also as my career progressed, it also actually went more towards management and more towards the strategy side rather than actually doing executing and really being very, very good and detailed and on what I'm doing. We're taking one or two more questions before we end the call, since this is a 45 minutes webinar. Does anyone have additional questions, whether it's career or whether it's like specifically on UX research, since we have an expert here tonight? So if there isn't, I will ask one other question, Sarah. So in terms of, you mentioned Singapore's design maturity is actually not very high. And so in your opinion, like what can the industry do? Like what are your general thoughts? Like how can we kind of improve the general maturity of design? And in your opinion, which country is like a mature design country?
So to answer the last part first, I will say that regardless of whatever country you're working in, there will be all levels of design maturity. There are design mature organizations in Singapore. I would just say that they're a little bit harder to find or a little bit harder to get into than like say like the UK or the US. So that like even though I did say that Singapore generally is not as design research mature, like just bear in mind that there's always all levels wherever you go.
Of course.
Yeah. So that's my clarification for that. The part
on how can we upskill, or rather how can we help the countries and the organizations be more design mature, and where are we aiming anyway?
Yeah. I mean, like I basically just want to create an environment where like designers are supported in doing the best work that they can do. That they're in the best position to like do their best work, but also like balance the business outcome side of that as well. I like this is very much a personal opinion, but I think designers shouldn't be afraid of like learning about the business side of like talking to the people that they find the most challenging and being like, hey, like I just kind of want to know like what's your day to day like what are the things that are important for you at work and how can I support that? And like, I mean, I say this both as a researcher, but I think it could just as equally well apply to designers. Just like, don't get so caught up on like, oh no, I am a designer. Like I shall never leave my safe box of Sketch and Figma and like, or tool of choice here. Like, just remember that
being
you're
open-minded and kind of like being a little bit uncomfortable, or pushing beyond your own comfort zone and just learning and
and remembering that you're always part of a multidisciplinary like system and a multidisciplinary team.
I think that's a beautiful way to think about it. So Lynn from the audience actually asked, if you were to test, actually Shimin has a follow-up question. Lynn, I'll come back to you. So Shimin asked, could you share 1 or 2 examples of local design agencies that are more design mature?
Let's see, local agencies. So I'm actually a bit nervous about answering this because I don't want to come across as like favoring people or implying that other places are not as good.
Okay, yeah, I think that's definitely a key consideration.
Yeah.
Shimin, I guess you're just trying to understand, which are the teams that are great to work with, right? Like, I'm just trying to understand the context or the reason behind the question. Yeah. Okay. Shimin understands the sensitivity. Okay. Cool.
I think maybe another way I could perhaps answer that question is rather than naming places, but kind of like maybe give some signs of what a design research what a more design mature organization looks like.
Yeah, I think that would be a great way. Like, what are telltale signs?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things include you're not just interviewed by HR or not just by management, but you're interviewed by other designers. You're interviewed by the people that you're going to be working with. I think is like a very like big thing. You can also like if you get design tests and things like that, like looking at the test and seeing what they're asking you will also give you a sense of the kind of questions and the kind of expectations that they may have of you in the job itself. So that might also like be kind of an indicator. And like, I mean, LinkedIn is an amazing thing. I just like check who's in the team and like check like basically like how many people they have in their team as well.
That's part of the design team, you're saying.
Yeah. So just little things like that can help you kind of like identify organizations that might be more aligned with what you're looking for. But
that's really great. So you talk about the green flags. What about the red flags? What are some of the red flags to look out for?
I think what have been red flags to me in the past is people not understanding the difference between market research and user research. And basically I've interviewed for user research positions where the person I was interviewing called me a market researcher several times. And then I like asked like, are you looking for a market researcher or are you looking for a user researcher? And like, they didn't know. So not having an understanding of what the role even like consists of is definitely like something to look out for. With like design and research tests as well. Like, yeah, basically like a test that is like hugely like all encompassing or doesn't fit the job description. So for example, you apply for a UI position, you apply for like a UX position, but you are only given a UI task to complete and only a UI task. And you get the sense that you're being graded on the quality of your visual design rather than the quality of your interaction design. So that's kind of like, that could be sort of like one other thing as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, great. Just like mismatches, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lovely. So thank you for sharing that, Sarah. And Lynn asked a question earlier, some minutes ago, and she asked, how do you test a digital product with a group of people who are not technology savvy? So for example, they might be part of the target user group, but maybe they're not the primary users, but they are still part of the user base you want to test and just be thorough with. So if they're not technology savvy, what would you do?
Okay, so there's the planning part and then there's the actual conducting part. In the conducting part, you shouldn't be actually testing like very differently, in my opinion. Unless like, I mean, this is very like generalized. It obviously depends on the like little details here and there, but like if you're testing whether somebody can use your system, in order to keep it a fair test, you should keep that test the same across different groups. That way you'll be able to tell like, okay, like this particular group performs like, or this particular group is able to complete like 80% of the tasks with no issue. This particular group, like they can only like only 30% of them can complete it.
Mm.
Then you go back to the group and you go back to the team and go like, look, we have this like score, you know, like they're not our primary user, but do we maybe want to allocate some resource and time to maybe making it easier for this group to use, or is this something that we want to deprioritize for now and come back to later? But yeah, so you shouldn't be testing them, like generally speaking, you shouldn't be testing them differently just because they are a different group. But I say that like very kind of like carefully, because I think there are instances where you should, in terms of planning the test. So a common issue when it comes to testing is like people will only conduct tests or interviews like on tools that are not accessible. Let's say, for example, you're using Lookback and to conduct remote interviews or remote user tests, people may not understand how to use it. You have to go through this process of having them download a thing that they don't know how to download or can't download without assistance. In those instances, you plan your testing to maybe use the tools that they are familiar with. Like I've heard of a product team here that basically switched a lot of their testing to like doing it on WhatsApp because that was what their participants were actually using on a day-to-day basis. So they could conduct interviews that way. They could like have them turn on the video and show them stuff, and like, and that was a tool that they could use and access
They
easily.
prefer. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that is like answering your question.
Yeah, Lynn, let us know. That answers the question.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Lynn, that's great. So Tabitha asked, you know, like when I'm going to an interview, whether it's for UI or UX, you know, what kind of design tests do companies give? Yeah, that's quite a big one.
Yeah. So that's a little bit hard to answer because it depends on what your company is, the company you're applying is like focusing on and things like that. I think the most common types of tests that I've seen. So I've received one that was, how might you improve the British voting system? This was for a position in the UK. So that was quite interesting and very open-ended because they were testing your like entire process and thinking process. So that was why it was so open-ended. I've also seen ones where they're very, very specific. Like for example, like you have a couple of days to design an e-commerce product for or an e-commerce site for this group of people, and you basically have to either rush out some very fast like interviews or put together something based on your own knowledge and best practices. So I've seen ones like those too. There are also like whiteboarding tests where you get brought in and then you're already like thrown into the team, and then the team is like, okay, like we have this hypothetical problem. What might your approach be to solving it and stuff? I like those the best because you actually get to know the team and see like who they are and
and you get
kind
to
of
work
questions
with
they
them
would
as
ask.
well.
Yeah, I like those. But that's me.
Yeah, so I guess Tabitha, to answer your questions, there are various types of tests.
Yeah, sorry, long answer.
There are some where you get to work with a team. There are some where you get to work alone. But usually they are time bound, and some that you actually have to do on site, and some that you have to do off site, maybe with a very tight timeline of 2 to 3 days. So those are kind of the tests. I'm sure there are resources out there that speaks about like different types of design tests that people issue. Sarah, I want to ask you one question, which I think only probably like you can answer, because you studied in the UK, right? I recall, and that you work a lot with UK users. So how important is it to, you know, as a UX designer, to be exposed to a global audience and just like doing research or doing design for global clients and things like that? What are the differences? Yeah.
So how important, I think there's like 2 questions there. One of them is, how important is it for a UX designer to kind of have a global mindset when it comes to designing? Answer to that is, it depends on the company and the product that you're working with. If it's a highly localized product, then you should pay much more mind to your local users. If it's something like much higher level, like something like, let's say a company that has a very universal brand like a Google, for example, then kind of like being more up to date with what the trends are in the originating country, like basically in Google's case, the States, like would be a lot more helpful.
Okay.
And then working to localize like after that,
Yeah.
potentially. Yeah.
When you were testing, say in the UK and versus like the majority of your work experience being in the Singapore, like was there like a difference in your approach, or it's kind of pretty universal, like the methods that you use are the same in the UK versus in Singapore, and it's more targeted on the problem itself?
Actually, I would generally say that my approach doesn't actually change that dramatically. I mean, there are some things like participants in Singapore do tend to be a little quieter. So there are some differences like that. I think things like how you do the incentives might differ. Some places like vouchers are acceptable. Some places want straight cash, and
Yeah.
and like other things, other considerations like that. But the actual conducting itself, I don't think I differ too much.
Difference
Like
in
the
terms
little,
of
it's like the little details, but not the overall end-to-end approach.
maybe like the way you
Scoping.
communicate with them, and
Yeah.
and the little incentives and things like that. But that's
Yeah.
a bit different. So
Yeah.
when well, I do relate to that as well. I remember doing research in Hong Kong for Aviva back then when I was working for them, and the agency that we work with and tell us, we don't give vouchers to people. We give them cold hard cash.
Yeah.
For taking leave to come for the user interview. So
Yep,
we don't
yep.
give them vouchers. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. and then I think these are like very interesting nuances. And I remember early days of Carousel, the founders, when they were doing user tests, they actually gave Starbucks gift cards, and people like were open to it. So yeah, it actually really varies in terms of the culture. Yeah. Any final parting advice for people who are looking to break into the industry in general?
I think I would probably say like be hungry and show people that you are hungry. Like attend webinars like these.
Thank
Like
you.
do courses. Do courses and like get the certs for them, put them on your profile. Like keep going to when things open up again, like go to events and talk to people. Like I think one of the I like to volunteer and do like side projects and things a lot. Like just sign up, do those, like do something for charity, go to hackathons, like just show that you're hungry and that you are willing to do what it takes in order to kind of like break in. Because the biggest hurdle is getting that first job once you like train or retrain as a UXer.
And you never know who you're going to meet, right? In these kinds of events. So I want to do a small plug for you. So Sarah, you run a community as well, right? So you want to talk a little bit about the community that you run and how can people be involved? Yeah.
Sure. So I run a very specialized community for design researchers, and like our goal is to support the design research like discipline as a whole in Singapore. So like we do have like a little bit of a screener to get in, but it's basically like if you are a very research focused person, then this is like your home basically.
Can they
That's
say
kind of
they actually watch this webinar and then can they just get in because they watch this webinar?
I mean, like just like mention in the screener that you were at the webinar, and we'll see.
Oh,
but,
wow. Okay, that's great.
Yeah, but we do want to really specifically support researchers because there are already communities that support designers. And we saw a gap in the market for researchers, basically. So if you do have a very specific interest in research, like talk to me, message me on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So find Sarah on LinkedIn and talk to her. I'm gonna put her LinkedIn sort of like profile over here. what's the name of the community or the name of the group, and where can
Design Research Singapore.
Design Research Singapore? Is it on
Yes.
meetup.com or something like that?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so it's on meetup.com. Find Design Research Singapore. Okay, so once again, if you are enjoying this, please kind of like leave a message and comment, and just let us know what you think. I'm just gonna take a couple of minutes to share some of the upcoming events that we have. And thank you so much, Sarah. You're welcome to stay around for a little bit. Let's see. So has this been helpful, guys? Like, if it's been helpful, please comment, please drop a message in chat, let us know, give a thumbs up or something. All right, so we do this every week, day in, day out, since I think since the middle of COVID, when I recognized that the number of UX design events specifically has actually dropped. There's less community events around, right? So when people have free time, where can they learn about UX? So I decided to create a weekly webinar series. I invite people that I know, and some of them are my ex-students as well. So I run this company called CuriousCore. I'm Daylon. I'm the founder and a trainer as well. And I've previously worked for Razer as their e-commerce architect. So if you're enjoying this specific webinar, and if you like to share what you learned on Facebook and LinkedIn, please use the hashtag Leaning Into Change, which you see on my background as well. What I'll do for you is that I will send you a 12-page UX career guide, together with 6 portfolio building tips in order to help you transition into the industry. So that's something that we prepared. And of course, if you're already a subscriber, you might have received the 6 portfolio building tips. So in any case, I will send you the UX career guide, which talks about how much the industry pays in Singapore, who's still hiring despite of COVID, what are some of the common interview questions that you'll encounter. And at the same time, I run a weekly workshop on Monday. These are workshops I used to run at General Assembly, as I used to be a part-time instructor there. And these are free intro to UX workshop. You're welcome to donate to charity, and I am doing it in the name of charity as well. We do it every Monday, 8 to 10 p.m. It gives you a good introduction to user experience design if you've never been exposed to it before, or if you're very, very new to the subject. So I've trained hundreds and hundreds of people in Singapore, Malaysia, and Portugal, where I did my sabbatical on this itself. And we do 2 things in what I do today, right? We serve corporates, but like Prudential, but we also serve professionals like yourself who are looking to upskill. So we have a weekend program, and at the same time, we also have a coaching program for people who are looking to break into the industry. So if you're interested, I'm just going to flash this very quickly, because the details of it, you can always email me and ask me about it. We're currently doing our first batch, which are designers who are looking to break into the industry and strengthening their portfolio. So what I realized is that many design schools fail to focus on career skills and fail to focus on portfolio preparation sufficiently. And therefore, when a designer transits into the industry, it becomes a lot more difficult for them. So that's why I decided to create this community and this paid program. And at the same time, if you like details, we don't accept everyone. So I kind of need to know where your career goal is. And if you like details, you can message me. And if you're kind of tuning onto our Facebook page and you haven't got on our list yet, do go to CuriousCore.com to get onto the list. So just gonna pull back in and check back on the comments and feedback. Let's see what everyone is saying. Right, so I got some private message. So Faye said very helpful with a thumbs up. Dania said awesome to learn about UX research. Shimin, okay, thank you Shimin for attending. Jesse as well said it was an insightful session today, very insightful from Fidaus. Thank you for attending, everyone. And do come back next week. We have experts every week to kind of like share with you what UX is about, and I'm going into like different parts of UX now that in the initial interviews or in additional webinars, we have been talking about UX in general. All right. So if you really enjoyed the session, do consider sharing, do consider tagging your friends to attend. Any last words from you, Sarah, before I kind of like end the call?
Thanks very much for having me, and it's been nice to see so many new faces and just to
Awesome.
just see like the new cohort of
Yeah.
UXDs.
Cool.
All
Yeah,
the best with your careers, guys. Like,
all the
it's
best.
great. It's a cool place to be. I
Yeah.
wish you all the best.
We have some really cool people here. I mean, like people
Mm.
transition from like different careers, and because the tech industry is like growing, so it's
Yeah.
kind of like growing as a community as well. So yeah, I think thank you so much for some of you here are not first timers, so thank you so much for attending the webinars and supporting. All right, I'll catch you all next week again. Sarah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much
Likewise.
for
Thank
coming
you.
by. I'll just kind of like wave you all off and stop the live stream.